the children's section with them. Although many of the biochemical processes of the Buteyko technique had been observed and known for years, it was Russian doctor Konstantin Buteyko who first realized how important they were in the treatment of asthma. Born in 1923, Buteyko first studied to be an engineer, but after serving with his country's forces in World War II, he was determined to study medicine and the most complicated piece of machinery of all, the human organism. In 1946, he enrolled in the first medical institute in Moscow. As part of his third-year studies there, he was required to monitor the breathing patterns of seriously ill patients. During hundreds of hours, he made some observations on breathing that changed the course of his career. Perhaps it was his engineering background that contributed to his deep interest in the actual mechanics of breathing. After graduating with honours from the Institute, he continued experimenting with breathing patterns independently. This led him to believe that over-breathing, which was known to cause a drop in the body's levels of carbon dioxide, could be the cause of many diseases. He experimented on himself and found he could reverse his own high blood pressure by reducing his breathing rate. When he forced himself to hyperventilate or overbreathe, his blood pressure increased again. After years of intensive study and research, he concluded that hyperventilation caused a number of diseases and that the current medical treatment for them was not getting to the root cause. He presented his theories to the Russian medical establishment, but was greeted with disbelief, ridicule, and professional jealousy. How could such a simple solution as changing breathing patterns be effective in treating major illnesses that had previously required drugs and surgery? It was a reaction that many other pioneering doctors before him had contended with. But there were some doctors who were interested in Buteyko's work and encouraged him to continue. Despite the opposition, he was able to establish a laboratory where 200 medical professionals were trained to treat patients with a variety of illnesses using his method. This was so successful that once again Buteyko tried to present his work officially to his colleagues, but again his success seemed to antagonize them and it became a political issue. After pressure from his former patients and the foreign press, Buteyko's work was finally recognized. The government health department eventually provided him with a clinic. If he could achieve at least an 80% success rate in treating the most difficult asthma cases they had, a recommendation would be made that his method be included in standard medical practice. Even though many of these patients had multiple health problems, Buteyko had an initial 95% success rate in treating them. After further treatment, the remaining patients were also relieved of their condition. So in effect, it was 100% successful. The Buteyko method was incorporated into the Soviet health system, where it is still taught in many hospitals. In 1989, an Australian businessman was hospitalized while in Moscow and treated with the method. He was so impressed that he persuaded one of Buteyko's colleagues to take it to Australia. Now it is taught in several countries around the world, and thousands of asthmatics outside of Russia have also benefited from controlling their asthma in this drug-free way. All asthmatics are different. All have their own individual symptoms. Some wheeze, some cough, others become silently breathless very quickly. Some asthmatics make a lot of mucus, while others become very tired. You may experience some or all of these symptoms, and others besides. Each asthmatic also has different causes or triggers which set off their asthma. These may include exposure to dust, pollen or other allergens, that is things we are allergic to, weather changes, an illness or injury, exercise or stress of some kind can all trigger an attack. You may react to only one or two of them, or you may be affected by a large range. While there is a great variety of symptoms and triggers, all asthmatics have one thing in common. When their condition is unstable, they breathe too much. This overbreathing is called hyperventilation. Medical trials conducted throughout the world have shown that asthmatics have significantly higher breathing rates than normal, healthy people. Let me explain what hyperventilation really means. You may associate it with panic attacks, gasping for air, loss of control of breathing. These are all examples of hyperventilation in its extreme forms, but there are less obvious forms. Hyperventilation simply means breathing more than is necessary. If you breathe constantly through your mouth, you are over-breathing. If you find yourself yawning a lot, sighing, or every so often taking a much deeper breath, even when you are not exercising, you are hyperventilating. Most of us have been taught that the more we breathe, the better, because then we get more oxygen. Take big, deep breaths. Does that sound familiar? This might sound logical, but basic physiology proves this wrong. When we increase our breathing rate or hyperventilate, the levels of gas in our blood become unbalanced. Oxygen is not the only gas that we need. Carbon dioxide is also vital. And when we hyperventilate, we lose lots of necessary carbon dioxide. Rather than being just a waste gas to be breathed out, carbon dioxide, or CO2, is involved in nearly every metabolic process in the body. When we don't have enough of it, our body will have serious problems. The Buteyko method normalizes these breathing problems and helps you stop hyperventilating. So let's have a closer look at what happens within our body's chemistry when we breathe. A substance in the blood called hemoglobin carries oxygen from the lungs around the body to the organs and tissues. But it cannot release the oxygen where it is needed unless there is the right acid-alkali balance there, or pH factor as it's called. This pH is controlled by the chemical effect of carbon dioxide. If we don't have enough CO2, it is difficult for the body to use the oxygen breathed in. The body compensates by producing lactic acid, and although this allows the necessary release of oxygen to take place, it's at a cost to your general health. Lactic acid causes tired, sore muscles and cramps. This is why asthmatics experience sore muscles, often in their chest, back and shoulders, after 2 or 3 days of asthma. Also during hyperventilation, the brain may receive up to 50% less oxygen than when your breathing is at the correct rate, because there just isn't enough CO2 for you to use the oxygen in your bloodstream. CO2 regulates the smooth muscle tissue in our bodies. These are the involuntary muscles. We have no conscious control over them, such as in the heart, bowels, stomach, arteries and veins. Our nasal passages and airways are wrapped around with smooth muscle, and this is where asthmatics are most aware of the lack of CO2. You see, when there is a shortage of CO2 in our systems, these smooth muscles go into spasm, tighten or constrict, a bit like cramping. This gives you the tight feeling in your chest associated with asthma. It also helps to explain why so many asthmatics have allergies and problems with the digestive system. The smooth muscle there is in spasm. It also affects our ability to breathe through our nose because the smooth muscle in the nasal and sinus passages is constricted. Let's see this in action with Virginia. Have you ever had an asthma attack while breathing through your nose? No, you tend to have asthma attacks breathing through the mouth. The more you breathe, the worse your asthma will become because your CO2 levels are becoming lower. The lower the CO2 levels, the tighter the smooth muscle is, and the more difficult it is to breathe. Even the amount of air we breathe is controlled by our levels of CO2. Chemical receptors constantly monitor blood in the arteries to maintain normal levels of CO2. This information is then relayed to the respiratory centre in the brain. If the CO2 levels become too high, this breathing control centre tells the body to breathe in more air. During long periods of stress, such as having the flu, coming into contact with allergens, or an emotional upset, there is an increase in both the heart and breathing rates. We are constantly surrounded by stresses, viruses, pollution, allergies, the list goes on. They all activate this reaction in our bodies. During these stresses, we continue to overbreathe for long periods of time. This means that the normal levels of CO2 drop. The respiratory centre in our brain becomes so used to the shortfall that it gives up trying to correct it. It will now accept a lower level of CO2 as normal. And how does it react to this reduced level of CO2? It tells us to breathe more often. Our bodies have now become conditioned to overbreathe or hyperventilate. When your breathing rate is higher, you have a greater chance of developing asthma. But before you begin to feel disadvantaged as an asthmatic, let's look at this a little closer. CO2 plays a big role in keeping the acid-alkali levels just right. If our blood became too acidic or too alkaline, we would die. CO2 combines with other molecules in the blood to stop this from happening. When we hold our breath for too long, the body's automatic control takes over and we faint. Normal breathing then starts again, whether we want it or not. This defense mechanism prevents the blood from getting too acidic and ultimately us dying. But we have another automatic defense mechanism that prevents the CO2 levels from becoming too low and the blood becoming too alkaline, and that is asthma. Asthma affects us by trying to cut down on the amount of air we are breathing. Symptoms such as mucus production and narrowing the airways that are so distressing are actually caused by your body letting you know that it is more alkaline than it should be and that you must decrease your breathing rate. Overbreathing affects other things too. It causes your airways to cool, dehydrate and get irritated. Breathing through your mouth not only allows you to take in too much air, but also dust, pollen and other irritants. You also lose a lot of moisture through mouth breathing. To try to counteract all these things, the linings in your airways produce more mucus than normal. This may make you sneeze, cough and wheeze. You will have a running or blocked nose. Continued overbreathing makes the mucus sticky, causing you to cough and wheeze even more. It all sounds like a nasty cycle, doesn't it? But this is what happens during asthma, and I'm sure you can recognize a lot of your own symptoms. The Buteyko method treats asthma's basic cause, and so this cycle is broken and your breathing becomes normal once more. Of course, this is a very simplified explanation of some complex biological processes. There is a